The American Diabetes Association plays a crucial role in shaping diabetes care worldwide. Its standards of care set the gold standard for diabetes treatment and technology recommendations, influencing insurance coverage here in the US and providing essential guidance for both physicians and patients. These guidelines help ensure that the latest advancements in diabetes management are accessible to those who need it most. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management. Now, one of the most exciting recommendations that has come out of the ADA's standards of care most recently is a recommendation that all people with type 2 diabetes, regardless of insulin use, should have access to continuous glucose monitors. This shift could have a massive impact on diabetes care, expanding access to a tool that has already transformed management for so many people with diabetes. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Grazia Aleppo, a professor of medicine at Northwestern University's Division of Endocrinology, Metabolism, and Molecular Medicine. With over 23 years as an adult endocrinologist, she has dedicated her career to diabetes care, especially in the realm of diabetes technology. In this episode, we dive into her work at the ADA, how an idea moves through the organization from conception to the standards of care, the rating system behind each new recommendation. We also get into the ADA's recent recommendation that healthcare providers support patients who are considering DIY uncleared algorithms like those I've talked about on this show, whether it be Trio, DIY Loop, or Android APS. Dr. Aleppo is just as passionate about diabetes technology as I am, maybe even more, and you'll hear that through her voice. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this show or any of my pages is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Now for the conversation. Grazia, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Justin, for having me here today. I'm excited to be here with you today. So I'm Grazia Aleppo. I'm a professor of medicine at the Division of Endocrinology, Metabolism, Molecular Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago. I've been working as adult endocrinologist for about 23 years now, and I've dedicated my career to diabetes, particularly diabetes and technology. For the last 3 years, I've been working with the ADA Professional Practice Committee to work on the standards of care, and I was assigned to be the lead, the chair of the diabetes technology section, which is chapter 7.
The ADA is something I hear about all the time, but I don't actually know that much about it. So when the opportunity came about to have you on the show to talk about not just the ADA, but the standards of care, I got super excited, and I'm so happy to have you here. So let's start with the biggest news that's come out from the ADA, which is the addition in the 2025 ADA Standards of Care. It now includes a recommendation for the consideration of continuous glucose monitors for adults with type 2 diabetes, whether they're using insulin or not. Tell us about what led to this addition.
Not only there was a new recommendation last year for type 2 people, adults, that should use CGM when they use basal insulin, but we also decided to look into people with type 2 diabetes not on insulin. And so the newest recommendation is 7.16 that says consider using CGM in adults with type 2 diabetes not using insulin or on glucose lowering medication other than insulin. And this is a level of evidence grade B. So let me explain to you what that means. First of all, we felt that we should sort of put together and accumulate the recommendation for CGM for people using insulin, whether it's type 1, type 2, kids, adults, didn't matter. So that is important because the data is so strong. So we wanted to put that aside in just one and sort of combine a few recommendations. And then we thought we need to do one for type 2 non-using insulin. So we had to look in the literature, and there is growing evidence that there are benefits for people with type 2 using CGM, not using insulin. And so we had to look into the growing research and the growing papers until we're able to say, now we feel comfortable that there is sufficient evidence to state that, yes, we should consider. Now, why do we not use recommend? Because right now we don't have large randomized controlled trials. We have some randomized controlled trial, a lot of retrospective information, and some prospective. So we needed to make sure we use the right level of recommendation to mirror the evidence that we have. And that's how we came up with the word consider and the
Okay.
evidence level B.
So, how long were you considering this addition before you actually implemented it? How
So
much how many trials and studies did you need to see to be like, okay, we're confident that we're going to recommend to all people with type 2 diabetes on insulin or not?
so the challenge is that with the standards of care, we have a huge responsibility because it's not just for the US. These recommendation and the guidelines I've read by people all over the world. So when you make a statement, you need to make sure you can support it with the literature behind it. So I've been looking for the literature for the last 2 years. And now remember, we prepared their guidelines the year before. So they're published December of, let's say, 2024 for 2025, but we start in March. And so we need to accumulate evidence that's been already published or can be published by, let's say, the deadline, whatever changes every year, right? So we might not get to use it because it was after the deadline. So you need to keep in mind that if you have an idea about what should be put as a new recommendation, to start gathering information. Sometimes it's a year before. And so we want to make sure that we wanted to put this recommendation out. People need to understand that it doesn't take 2 days to get this out, it takes a year. So we need to have enough publication that make the recommendation solid. So that's why it takes so long to put a new recommendation.
And within the standards of care, you said like at 16.7, there's a line that says this.
7.16.
Okay, 7.16. Okay, I'll remember that. Ooh, I was close. So if I wanted to learn more about how that got there, is there a way to like click in there and then it shows you all of the studies that were considered
Actually,
for
the
that?
studies are cited. So if you go to
Okay.
the chapter 7 of the standards of care is diabetes technology, you can see that so the recommendation is in the inset, in the pink inset, but then in the text it tells you exactly what the studies, what they supported. So you can go to the bibliography at the end of the chapter and see which studies were used to make this statement. And there were several we had to study come up with because, again, not having 2 or 3 large randomized controlled trials, we used everything available within those 12 to maybe 12 months or so, 18 months or so to bring the recommendation to life. So you need to really dig into the literature and find as much as possible, but also as to be recent. It cannot be 5 years ago, obviously.
Okay. So once these recommendations go into the standards of care, what kind of happens next with those? Who is that signaling? How are people hearing about this? Who is keeping their ears open for something like this?
So there is a great amount of trepidation, expectation in December when the guidelines get published online. Everybody waits for the days, what is new? And we try to go flip the
Mm-hmm.
pages, right? But also the message is there for other people to read. And we are hoping that by putting the recommendation in the standards of care, then there will be a follow-up of payers. Because you see, the job of the recommendation is to put it there as the literature supports it. So it's a true statement. It's not because one day I woke up, I thought I want CGM for everybody, and I can't do that within working at the ADA, volunteering that is. So once the evidence is there, then we are hoping that they will transform into coverage. For example, when there was the recommendation for type 2 on basal insulin from the mobile trial a few years ago, that then became that Medicare started covering CGM for basal insulin instead of multiple daily injection for type 2, and then that followed by the insurance, the payers. So it starts someplace, but you need to again go back to the evidence. So now that we have the evidence and we have put this recommendation, we're hoping that with time the payers will read this and understand that they should consider, like we said, the use of CGM in people without taking insulin, because many people today are able to come off of insulin when they use GLP, for example, and then they're using the CGM when they're on insulin and GLP, whatever the medication is, and then when they're off, they're faced with the fact that they might not be able to afford it anymore, and that becomes really difficult because they really want to see that information. So that's my clinical experience. On the guidelines part, we are hoping that when we put the information as a new recommendation, there will be some sort of a awareness and hopefully coverage in the future.
So you mentioned GLP-1s in there, and I just want to stick with that for a second. Is that making your recommendations for type 2 a little more tricky just because of how that's affecting people with type 2 and how they may not need insulin or CGMs
No,
because of that?
no.
No. Okay.
But remember, when people are treated today, they should receive GLP because it's such a great medication for many benefits, cardiovascular, you name it, OSA. But often what happens is that a patient is on insulin, they start using CGM, the glucose get better, and they might be able to come off of insulin because it's not just a GLP, it's a combination of GLP and CGM, and the literature supports that. So the combination of those two enhances the benefit. So in fact, when you add CGM to GLP, you make the glucose even better. So having that information, that immediate feedback, enhances their ability to self-manage.
When you're adding these recommendations, are are they always based off of what drugs are indicated for? And what I mean by that is many people with type 1 diabetes are finding success with GLP-1s because it stabilizes their blood sugar levels and they have much better control. But it's not indicated for that. Doctors can't prescribe it for type 1. Would the ADA look into that?
No, that's beyond the scope. It's not part of what the standards of care are. They are a way for us to research the literature and bring up new recommendation based on the literature weight. Now, sometimes this might result in approval of systems or indication of medication, but it's not the role of ADA to promote that.
Totally, that makes sense. This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 30-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic. You mentioned that the ADA has had an impact on coverage. Can you kind of tell me about that a little more? Have you seen direct influence on the CGM world with coverage?
So it's yes and no. So the ADA puts out the information that is available in the literature. And by doing so, hopes that there will be an impact and some recognition from the payers who then are able to accept that those guidelines are strong enough, support enough the literature, that there are benefits and therefore patients can they have benefits of using these tools and they can cover them. So they don't specifically drive that, but definitely the fact that the guidelines are out there and they're supported by such a very strict method of vetting the literature shows that if a recommendation is in the guidelines, has merit to consider the coverage from the payers. We want to also make the providers aware because you see, providers do so much for patients. So when you see that there are more evidence, there is more information about a specific tool, in this case CGM, and the provider reads it, they are more encouraged to use these systems. And by doing so, they get more information, they get more knowledge. So it's not just for payers. The ADA guidelines, in fact, are to help people who practice medicine to do better for their patients.
Is ADA leading any type of charge, or is anyone to get not just people in the diabetes space, like endos and diabetes educators to read this, but primary care, because my primary care misdiagnosed me for 6 months with type 2 diabetes. Is there any form of education through the ADA to educate people outside there who can also get involved, even with insulin pumps, right? Just for
So,
their patients who don't have
so
an
the
endo.
ADA is not for endocrinologists. The ADA is for every person in medicine who wants to understand diabetes and improve their knowledge. And in fact, the mission is to improve the care, prevent, and hopefully cure one day diabetes, but also expand the knowledge to everybody, people with diabetes, providers, clinicians, nurses, medical assistants, anyone, primary care, and especially primary care, because they have many more people with diabetes, especially type 2, that they see compared to endocrinologists because there are few of us. So the ADA mission is to really expand the knowledge and to take care of people with diabetes. So there are a bunch of volunteers that and the families and caregivers and healthcare professionals and also professional staff. But the idea is a family. It's not just a book that comes once a year. It truly is an entity that supports the people who have diabetes.
Gotcha. You mentioned before you used the word volunteering. Is the work you do at the ADA, are you volunteering that time?
Absolutely. Strictly volunteering. So it is a great privilege to be invited to be in the professional practice committee because the ADA chooses key clinician. And so that you get invited is a huge honor because you are have a huge responsibility. So it's all on a volunteer basis and you spend many months. And I did this for 3 years. I was so privileged to be able to do that and offer whatever knowledge I had, but also to look for papers, literature, think about new recommendation, and to sort of expand the thing that was assigned to me, which was the chapter 7. So yes, and that's why it's so important because being a volunteer, you really have to be engaged and wanting to do it because you have to meet over and over again to make sure that these guidelines are voted on, that we sort of a wordsmith, we adjust every word. There is no case, it's not a chance that there is a word there that is written because we just didn't realize. We had to pick and choose every single word so that the message is very clear. So we have to go through 80%, there to be 80% agreement in the voting. Every single recommendation gets through voting, more than one side, more than one cycle, excuse me. So it's truly a coming together of the minds and the people who have expertise, and then looking to make recommendation to improve the life of a person with diabetes and then the health.
Wow. Well, thank you for all the time you spend on this. The ADA standards of care are considered the gold standard. Why is that?
Because first of all, they're really objective. There is no industry support. It's only funded by the ADA. The work is done by volunteering. We have to declare a conflict of interest. And so when you have so much strict sort of criteria, you're not putting a recommendation because you want to help a company or the other. It's nothing like that. You want to make sure that the data they're available, that some of the people have done, whether it's industry, um, government funded, NIH funded studies or foundation like JDRF for Breakthrough Type 1 has validation. When we have this so much strict criteria, then we can say we feel comfortable that we have said truthful information, that it can be vetted, looked up. And so there is no, it feels like it's really transparent.
What would you say are some other pivotal endeavors that the ADA has led up until now? Things that the ADA has done that you're proud of.
They do so much advocacy. It is incredible. So much advocacy for just about everything diabetes. But also have a lot of things, programs for the person with diabetes, and not just the provider. So there are two different components: there's professional ADA component and the person with diabetes. If you go to ada.org, diabetes.org, excuse me. So diabetes.org, you see recommendations, information, resources for people with diabetes and the professional component as well. So the ADA doesn't just want to write recommendation for physicians or clinicians. It wants to write information and support the person with diabetes. It even has information on counselors, psychologists. It has a time and range information to understand what time and range is. It tells you about food exam, eye exam, so many things that are for the person with diabetes. There's also a component of diabetes education that is very important, where there are specific criteria by which a center can have accreditation from the ADA for diabetes education. Our institution has an accredited center, and it's a specific benchmarks. And so it's got a lot of work that surrounds the person with diabetes, really sort of 360, wraps around the person.
I can just feel and see your passion and your enthusiasm for this, and it's fun to work on something that you feel so passionate about. Tell us a little bit about your background. What kind of led to this, and how did you get involved?
So I've been practicing for more than 20 years here in Chicago, Northwestern University, and I have a passion for diabetes that was started when I was a fellow. And so I really felt that diabetes technology was the answer. And to me, when I was a fellow, it's when CGM was initially brought to them 25 years ago, was brought to the market. And I thought this is the tool that is going to change the way we treat people with diabetes. And I feel that CGM is the next important thing after insulin discovery, because without CGM, we wouldn't have anything else like AID system, automation, integration, and nothing like that. So that made me truly become so engaged with the person with diabetes, the technology. In those days, they were not even covered. My patient would pay. Before 2008, before the JDRF study, patients would pay because the aha moment, the fact that they could reduce hypoglycemia was so important. And so, and my practice grew because I really was just engaging with technology from day one. And so then I got much more experience. I started doing some clinical trials. I did a lot of clinical trials that really shaped CGM. The Replace BG was the trial that allowed CGM to become non-adjunctive. So you don't have to prick your finger anymore. And we had to prove that. So we did decide to say, we know that it's safe, but we need to prove it to everyone. So that was an important study. And I did many more studies on other, I did the mobile study for CGM and type 2 without multiple daily injections and so forth, AID studies. So I've gathered some expertise, and then the ADA invited me, and I thought it was the greatest thing. So I felt so honored to be able to participate. It's a big responsibility because these guidelines are read by so many people, and you have to make sure, again, it's not just the US, it's all over the world, that whatever you say is also can be done not just in America, but also other countries. And so you want to be really smart, and you have to be really attentive to what you say.
Um, what would you say is one of your greatest achievements at the ADA?
That I was able to really work with them for the Chapter 7 diabetes technology and expand it. And the people before me did a great job. They basically started from scratch. And then I felt that my role was to grab the literature now and expand the recommendations. So we did. Over the last 3 years, we've added many recommendations. We made many much stronger recommendation and stronger sort of statements to truly say this is here to stay. For example, AID system, now they become preferred because the data is so strong for therapy with type 1, for example, where you know that the amount of diabetes, I'm sorry, glycemic wellness is so much better with AID than with, let's say, standard pumps or multiple daily injection. But this is because there have been so much data generated, so we've been able to grab it and expand it. We also, what I'm very happy about this past year, this year I should say, recommendation is the one about the open APS. So used to call it DYI, but we call it open APS. So there are these systems that are not necessarily FDA approved, but they're out there for people who have joined this "We're Not Waiting" movement. And so now there's more and more evidence that shows that these systems help the patient. So even though the algorithm is not approved, the other components of the pump and the sensor are approved, and it's our job to support the patient into their journey. And if they choose to be on a system that meets their needs, then my job is to also support them. And today we have evidence that is growing that says, yeah, these systems are actually safe. And so some have been approved. Hopefully more will be approved in the future. But nevertheless, there was one thing that I was so happy to put in this 2025 guidelines that say, think about the patient who already comes to us with an open APS, know the literature, which we explain in the narrative, and say, yeah, this can be used. You need to support the person with diabetes. And that they come with the two pieces that are the sensor and the pump are approved. The piece in the middle
Hmm.
is not, but there are, safety measure in place. You work with your patient and you support the patient to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I do a lot of work in the DIY space, open APS, throughout my channels. I talk about it a lot. I've used many of them, and they're fantastic, and a lot of people swear by them. Can you tell me more about what has just gone in that realm? You're saying there are recommendations for this. Like, what has the ADA said when it comes to these systems, and are they encapsulating, like, say, DIY Loop, Trio, AAPS, Android APS, like all of these? Are they
So we're
encapsulated?
not giving names. We just say
Okay,
support
no
the
names.
patient. Well, we can't, right? So what we're trying to say is to, in the recommendation, to support the patient with diabetes that uses these systems because there is growing evidence in the literature that these are safe. So it's about supporting. The recommendation is to A, be aware, and B, to support the patient who uses them. So it's really again about the human with diabetes. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
So we can't say
absolutely.
recommend because they're not FDA approved, but we need to support the patient who uses them. And that's what the recommendation is all about.
Yeah, and that's what the community wants. It's what the patients want. The patients, when they go into their office talking to their doctor about this system, they don't want to just be told, no, not with me, goodbye. They want to at least be spoken to about it, right? At least for it to be considered. And a lot of people are just shut down.
Well, there is a challenge there. Some provider wanna be familiar with the system, so we need to also understand, and that's why also there is information in the narrative, because once you read the guidelines, you have the narrative that tells you this is what the study shows. So you have plenty of opportunity to become educated. So we want to do with the providers. So I can respect that someone doesn't feel comfortable because they are not aware or they're not familiar with the system, and that would be one of the situations. And so we're hoping that in the future there will be more knowledge, and that's why we say support the patient. There are these tools, and sometimes a provider is interested into trying to learn more. Sometimes they might feel uneasy, and you cannot judge the provider either because they feel that the license might be a risk, and you have to sort of go into this gray area. But if a clinician is comfortable with these systems, they are willing to work with the patient. That is wonderful. That's when they are supporting the patient.
Okay. I'm going to put the standards of care in the show notes for this so people can go and find it. If they were to go in there, where can they find this literature about open APS?
So in the narrative, so in chapter 7, with the recommendation is a bit about the end after during the AID subchapter, sort of a subsection, you read the description of the studies that we use to make the statement, and there is the references. The references, you go to the back of the chapter and you look all the papers that we use to generate the recommendation and to generate the language and explain what these systems do. Now, this is not a dissertation on the open APIs because it's within AID, CGM, and connected pen, so you can just write such a longer thing. But the paper that were utilized that had the best evidence are reported there, so you can go and look at them if you want to learn
Okay.
more
Yeah,
about it.
I want to as well. So that was just as
Yes.
much for my audience as it was for me, because I'd like to read up on, what people are reporting about these systems.
But we also expanded the AID portion because since last year there have been so many more tools that have been approved and more literature available, we had to make sure that it was really about what this system do. So it's very detailed. So that's why it's an educational basically a document, because if you want to learn more about AID system, you go to the chapter, you have a lot of information on what the studies were, what they showed, what the results were, the population that was, what these tools do and don't do. And even we put that is, one tool that was approved for type 2 diabetes. Of course, we don't say the name because we don't want to be, we cannot make specific branding name, but we know that before the end of the year, one brand was approved for type 2 diabetes of AID, and now there are two. So we're trying to, again, be as up to date as possible to say, this is what they are. You can educate yourself and learn about how to take care of patients who want to use an AID. Even if you're in primary care, why not? It's good to know.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. Who exactly is on the decision-making side of the ADA? You were brought on. Who else is being brought on to this
So we
board? Is it a board?
Well, it's a different layer. So
Okay.
the professional practice committee has several key leader clinicians, okay? Clinicians who have a lot of expertise either in diabetes, in hypertension, in pharmacology, in kidney disease, in different areas of the guidelines. We all get together in pediatrics and adults both. In geriatrics, all these people get together and we are assigned either to be the lead of a section or the in the subcommittee for other chapters. So we don't just do one thing, we do 4 or 5. And then we meet very often, I must say, for each chapter that we have assigned, and we go over the previous literature, we look at the new literature, and we come up with new recommendations. Or we say, and then we have to vote on this in different stages. We vote first as a preliminary vote to see if they can go through. If there are minimal changes, then we vote on the minimal changes. But the ones that are new need to be presented at a yearly meeting. So we meet together, 2-day meeting um, at the ADA headquarters, when we go through the entire new recommendation one by one. It's why it takes 2 days. And then we have the voting, which is the professional practice committee, the 2 chairs, people who help us with the literature, evidence, to understand better the evidence, epidemiologists. And then these go to peer review. And then they go to the board so that we get feedback. And then while that's happening, we need to work on the narrative to report. And so in a narrative fashion, write what we put into the recommendation and sort of support what we say in the recommendation, the various articles that support the recommendation. We have to update hundreds and hundreds of references every year. Then it goes to production. They give us the proof. We have to go one more time to read them all, make sure there is no confusion in the editing. And then finally goes to diabetes care for proofing and for print.
How does a recommendation get, put on the pedestal? Is it someone just like you or anyone else that's like, I think that this should be something that we start looking at, and then it, goes up the chain? How is that starting?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about, right? So if it's a new medication, new recommendation for a particular medication, we have to say, okay, it's time for this new topic to be placed in the guidelines. We propose it. So when we meet together for our chapter, our section assigned to us, we say, because we basically know what's going on in the particular area, we feel, okay, this is time to start thinking about this topic and how should we go about it? Can it actually become a recommendation? Many times we don't get them, they don't make it to the recommendation because it's either premature, there is not enough supporting literature, it may be controversial, it's not ready, so we wait. And we'll be waiting for some things to, like the type 2 neuroenzyme, we had to wait to get more literature, for example. And then we present the new recommendation to the entire committee, and they can say yes, and they can say no by voting. We need an 80% vote to pass. Let's say propose a new recommendation, need to present it, present the papers that I actually chose, discuss the papers. So not just these are the papers, explain what they are, what level of evidence, what kind of study they are they randomized, are they retrospective, prospective. So to explain to the entire team what this is about. And then we go through the writing of it, the wordsmithing, and then the level of evidence. We need to decide which one are we going to assign to it, and then it goes to voting. And sometimes something had to be changed even after, because they might say I might approve the language but not the level of evidence. So you need to go back and forth to say, is it B, is it C, is it B, is it A, what is it? So we need to
Tell me
dig
more
more.
about that. And
Yeah.
you mentioned it earlier. The CGMs for people with type 2 diabetes without insulin got a B rating, and there's an A, B, and C rating. Can you kind of walk
Correct.
us through what the differences are between those three?
So evidence A is the highest one. It is from well-conducted, large randomized control trial. It can be 20 people, it has to be a bigger number. And you have to have two arms. You have to have the control and the intention, right? Or and the experimental arm. Otherwise, there is no, it's biased. So then B is evidence from less rigorous study, smaller study, and then C is observational. So retrospective, prospective, but there is no intervention, just observe what happened. If you put somebody on CGM, this is what happened, right? But for the CGM for people with type 2 without insulin, there were couple of randomized control study, not big, smaller, and a lot more smaller study with less rigorous methods. So this is where the B came in.
Do you think that there has been enough studies in the last year to move it to an A, or is there still a lot of work left
We
there?
don't know. They're not published yet, right? So I don't know that.
When do they publish?
And we don't know. So we're
Okay.
going to ATTD conference in Amsterdam next week. There will
Ooh,
be ADA. So I hope to see more
okay.
information at those two conferences. And so that would be a great place to say, okay, there is more movement, more studies are being done. And so once the studies are done and they're published, then they can be considered.
Okay, okay. Are you and the other people in the ADA, are you going to these conferences and searching out for these new studies and saying, "Oh, this one could be used for that and we could maybe get it to an A," or, you're kind of pulling this information out, looking at all
So
that stuff?
yes, I go to the conference quite often, but that is not sufficient because a conference usually has an abstract, okay? So that abstract needs to become a publication because if it doesn't go from abstract to publication, you can think what happened. Didn't they have enough information to be published in peer-reviewed journals? Sometimes when you go to this conference, they present a result and there's a paper that gets released at the same time. So you can see there is more information. And so we go to the conference, we see what's out there, we get information about what the new things are. We hope to see those presentation become manuscript published in the literature so we can then read them and say, are they gold standard A recommendation studies or not?
Okay. Is there like an ADA certificate? You know how you buy a piece of food and it's like USDA certified or whatever it is? Like, is there a
No.
stamp of approval that the ADA gives? No, no.
No. This is, again, what the standards of care are truly to engage with the clinician to improve their knowledge. And by doing so, improve the care they deliver to people with diabetes. There is no stamp, but the guidelines are a live
But it would be a
document.
cute stamp.
Uh, but you see, the guidelines are a live document. They get updated. If so, let's say something
Yeah,
important happens between now and December, there's a live update because you don't want to wait another year to put another update. Does it make sense? So the beauty of the
absolutely.
guidelines, it's a dynamic document. It doesn't stay there petrified for years. A changes every single year, and that's a lot of work to change 300 pages of documents. B, if there are important updates, we put them out. as a live update. So that is also how involved you need to be and up to date to make sure that if something comes to your attention, say, hey, we need to change it because what was said 6 months ago now is no longer valid. I need to do something else. So we update it to make it more current.
Okay. Okay. What are you hearing may come next for the standards of care? Are there some talkings of upcoming stuff that you think will be exciting?
So the thing that excites me the most is that I'm waiting for the next version of the guidelines based on what I might see at the conferences. So there is so much out there, but again, so much can be just ephemeris. It happens one day and never becomes anything else. So once it becomes part of the guidelines, the standards of care, that we know that whatever was seen in conference on papers and literature was strong enough to give people the confidence that can become a recommendation. We are waiting for so much more stuff, miniaturization of systems, more data for type 2 diabetes and AID. I'm hoping to see more data of this kind of studies because type 2 patients really can use AID system very successfully. And so I'm looking forward to seeing some presentation at the ATTD that will be presented for a study that was done. So I'm looking forward to see what they're going to say. And if they will influence the guidelines, I don't know, but it would be nice to see more data on people with type 2 using technology.
Yeah, that was my next question was if AIDs for people with type 2 would kind of be next on the docket. A lot of pump companies are already pushing their pumps to support that. But I'm
So,
sure in the ADA coming out with a recommendation for that would
but you have to have
really
the
push it.
data. You
But
have
we
to have
need
the
the
data.
data. Just because
So,
these companies say our products work for these people doesn't necessarily
okay.
mean that these people need it or it's recommended,
You see,
right?
the beauty of this is that once you do a study, and you publish it, this study is being looked at with the fine tooth comb by a bunch of reviewers and not just get published because you want it to be published. It goes back and forth. So if there is a publication that really supports strongly that something is that good, then the ADA will look at it and say, hey, maybe we should put this in the guidelines because the study was done so well. So we're looking, so the companies can say whatever they like. Of course, they support their products, but we need to add the publication to support their statements. Does it make sense? So
Yeah.
people with type 2 diabetes, at some point, they need insulin. And they have a lot of challenges with multiple daily injections because they forget to take 4 to 5 injections per day. And the absorption can be maybe not super good because they take a lot of insulin. But the AID system, some of them do phenomenal for these patients. Will the literature support it? We'll find out soon. We're going to the
Yeah.
conference next week.
Well, so am I. I'll see you there.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And this episode, I think, is releasing on the Monday of next week. So we should meet up and be like, go watch our episode. Um, so I know a lot of tech companies, CGM, pump companies, they put out research, they fund research. Do you scrutinize that any differently than if it were just some research lab? You look at the data that they're providing and you verify it?
So if I participate or I'm invited to participate in a study sponsored by an industry, a manufacturer, I want to make sure that the study, when I read the protocol that is done, the protocol has some weight. And if it doesn't, I give my feedback. But once I participate, my job is to do the best that I can to conduct the study in the most rigorous way. So when the results are published, they are real. They are not fake. They are real and they make a difference. Otherwise, why do the study spend so much money? Because it's not cheap. And so I've done, and I feel privileged because I get to see firsthand the challenges, the things that can become problematic, but also work on engaging with the participant. And that is such a beautiful thing. The person that does the study, the clinical researcher, the person that's participating in the study, the patient with type 1 or type 2, they engage with you for those whatever many months, they are so enthusiastic. They, at least in what I practice, they're looking forward to say, okay, I'll do another study with you because they get to try these things firsthand. I think it's wonderful. And so you have a component of, yes, it's industry sponsored, but they make the money, the machine. I can't get it myself, right? But then the patient that the participant we use and we engage with them they get so much benefit out of it. And I learned the pros and cons, and that is presented and that is published. And then we can say, okay, it also depends what is published and makes a big difference, because some journals have a higher standard than other ones, right? So if it gets published in a pretty renowned journal, you think, okay, it was done with the right criteria, and you can really sort of look at the data and be comforted that what is written is really what happened.
Hmm. The FDA recently released guidance for AI, artificial intelligence. You have Dexcom, who's implemented AI into their Stelo CGM for people with type 2 diabetes. Is AI something the ADA is already looking at as something, that could kind of fall into your laps?
I can't speak to that really. What I'm looking forward to seeing is results from study using AI, and how can that help the patient with diabetes have an easier life. So in this moment, my response will be, okay, see what's going on. Are there studies using AI to help people recognize food, for example, so carbs containing. So I'm sorry, I should say carbs recognition in taking a picture. I'm just making an example. If that then is published and there are reports that support that are beneficial to patients, then the ADA role is to say, let's look at the literature and see what we can do with this to make the patient's life easier.
You mentioned that you've been doing this for at least 25 years, and you said that you've seen CGM grow and become so integral in treatment. If the last 25 years of your career is indication of where we may go in the next 10 to 25 years, how are you feeling about the future of diabetes treatment and technology?
So I really see in the birth of technology and the development has been so fantastic to see so many changes. I'm thinking about the patient most of all, how to make this tool easy to use for people with diabetes of any age. That's very important. We're seeing people with diabetes aging beautifully because they survive 50, 60 years with diabetes. Can they still use this system? Can we make them simple for them to use? Can we allow them to use when they're getting older? So are they smaller? Do they require more dexterity or less dexterity? Can they be more automated without the need for intervention? So I see, as I've seen this moving along, hopefully the decrease of the burden of the person with diabetes in their daily life. Fewer things to think about, fewer buttons to push, fewer thoughts about having diabetes, because the technology is taking care of that component.
Yeah, well, you can sign me up for that. Grazia, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was such a cool view into a side of diabetes that I never really knew about. And it's cool to hear about all of the work that's going on to make this information about treatment and education more accessible to the physicians that then can help, patients like me. So it's very
I am
cool.
so happy that you invited me to be part of um, your your podcast, and I follow you too. So I'm subscribed to you anyway.
Oh, amazing, amazing.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much again.
What are your thoughts on the standards of care? Is there something that you believe should be on there that isn't? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to follow our blog and newsletter with the link in the show notes. I've got articles going up there every week, a newsletter going out twice a month. Thanks for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube and give the video a like if you're also watching on YouTube. I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.